I'm a professor of public health at the Frankfurt University of Applied Sciences in Frankfurt in Germany. I'm working in the Faculty of Social Work and Health. And we are doing a lot of studies in the prison field, in the detention field. And I would like to present now to you results from a recent study on harm reduction in European prisons, which has been promoted by the European Commission. But before that, I would like to draw your attention to some other documents. These two documents, Health in Prisons and Prisons Health, have been issued by the World Health Organization, by the Regional Office of Europe in Copenhagen. And these two documents, available also in Russian and in many other languages, can be seen as the core documents, the core books, which are dedicating their work to special areas of healthcare in prisons, which are coming necessarily in each and every prison in every angle of the world. Another one issued by the UNODC and the WHO is a document on good governance for prison health in the 21st century. It's a policy brief on the organization of prison health, very recommendable because it's especially, let's say, working out this Rule 24, the second chapter of that. That means how to work on prison health in the 21st century. But there are some other documents I would like to recommend to you. Healthcare and Detention, a very basic document which delivers the standards of healthcare, but also the standards of social well-being and living in prisons, and especially important, women and imprisonment. You know, the Bangkok Rules, which are the second important international acknowledged document. They are setting the rules for keeping women in prisons with lots of alternatives to imprisonment and lots of rules on how to treat women inside the prison setting. These documents are highly recommendable, and they form sort of the basis of what needs to be known and also what needs to be done in terms of improvement of the healthcare services in prisons. Coming back to the prison population in Europe, in general, approximately 750,000 people are incarcerated at any given time in Europe, in the political Europe, not in the European Union. That means that we have approximately 2,000 prisons in the EU of 30. We do have a prison population rate of 100,000 in the EU. The EU average is approximately 130. Russia has 475 prisoners per 100,000 population, and the top jailer in the world is the US, with approximately 700 prisoners per 100,000 citizens or 100,000 population. 4% of all the prisoners are women. In total, approximately 32,000. An increasing number of women are incarcerated, and often their needs are neglected because they are forming such a small group in each and every country. And on the other hand, you see that imprisonment is mainly a male dominated phenomenon. 95–96% of all prisoners are male, but it is lacking that we do have a specific masculine male insight into the whole prison healthcare. 17 countries in Europe are reporting overcrowding. 16% on the average of the prisoners are foreigners. 1/4 of the prisoners do not have a final sentence. So they remain in the remand prison and awaiting trial. Drug users, DU, mainly are serving short sentences, but have a high turnover rate. So the revolving door is especially true for drug users. There's a high recidivism in prisons and a lot of people who are vulnerable and marginalized. Drug users, especially in European prisons, approximately 1 million prisoners per year in Europe. There's a high turnover rate, and this is included in this number. 15 to 25% are sentenced for drug-related offenses. This is a very low number, and in most countries, this goes. The data go only into the statistics once for the first offense, as drug users are often involved in stealing and burglary and other issues. Then this offense is being counted, but the real number is approximately higher. We do have numbers from the US. 25 to 50% of prisoners on admission are drug dependent. In Europe, almost 1 in 6 prisoners is a so-called problem drug user. That means he or she is injecting drugs with high dependence potential. 10 to 42% of the prisoners report regular drug use in prison, and 1 in 15% have injected drugs while in prison. We just had a study from the Robert Koch Institute here in Germany. That is the main health monitoring institute for the whole of Germany. And they did a study on hepatitis C, and they found out within their study that 11% of German prisoners first use drugs while incarcerated. So prison is not a good school to learn, but lots of negative and risk-related behavior is to be learned while in prison. Up to 21% of injectors initiated injecting while in prison. So that's an alarming figure, which says that those people who inject drugs, they turn to inject to the injection habit once in prison because it's the most economic way to get a maximum out of a minimum. And as drugs are, of course, contraband and are being smuggled into prison, you need to take, let's say, this route of administration and not, let's say, smoking from aluminium foil, because other prisoners might smell the heroin or other drugs you are snorting or inhaling, or even the staff gets to know about what's happening in your cell. And 90% relapse to heroin use after release. Here you see general prison data and the proportion of prisoners sentenced for drug offenses in 2016. And you can see here your country, my country, as I told you, Germany is approximately 13 to 15%. And this comes out of different statistics in Europe. The most important one is space, where they have the stock data, and our study ourselves, we also generated some of the statistics being shown here. The proportion of people who inject drugs, that's the abbreviation of this term, reporting prison history from 2006 to 2015, is approximately 80%. As I told you, Germany is leading this statistic in that way that lots of people get caught by the police, incarcerated, and put into a risk environment. And you see here other countries like Portugal, for instance, on the other end of the statistic is incarcerating far less people who are using drugs, who are injecting drugs into the prison setting. It's only, let's say, shortly above 20%. And the prevalence of injecting drug use prior to imprisonment, again, we do have different pictures throughout Europe. You see here Lithuania and Germany do have quite high figures of injectors prior to imprisonment. And the prevalence of injecting drug use during imprisonment is shown in this slide. And you see here Germany more than 20%, Latvia more than 10%, and the rest of the countries, or some selected countries afterwards. Going a little bit deeper into the drug use in prisons in Germany, this is a very recent statistic from a study in Germany on drug users imprisoned. This is giving you a general overview on the main substance being used from different areas, and also differentiated by gender. And you see here that, let's say, the light lila, it's a multiple substance use. We are seeing here in different areas of imprisonment or detention. This is remand prison. And you see here it's quite high among male, but even higher among W is female. You see here 31% using drugs of different origin and are having a multiple drug use. Then coming, let's say, to opioids is here. You see here it has a different option. 15% in the youth area, in the youth prisons, do use opioids. It's 14% in the remand prison, 14 to below 21 year, and it makes up a substantial part of the, let's say, the usual prison sentence. Among the females, among 30%, half of it at the in the male prisons, male. So you see here, looking only at the sentence, the loss of freedom. You see here that women especially are vulnerable. A special vulnerable group. 40% are using multiple drugs and 30% are using opioids. So you see here, women are especially vulnerable for that situation. Here we see data from a study carried out by the German states, the German Länder. 44% of the nearly 42,000 included prisoners in that study do report a drug problematic, either dependence or misuse, according to the criteria of the WHO ICD-10. At the point of their step into the prison, 27% reported a dependence, and for 17, a misuse of psychoactive drugs has been concluded. You see here again substance use dependence, that the female share is much higher than the male share, and the misuse is lower also in male than in female prisoners, and the problematic with drug use in general is shown in the last two bars, M for male, W for female. And you see here, especially multiple drug use is the main source and the main reason of drug use for many women in prison. When we look at infectious diseases among prisoners, we see here in this statistic the prevalence of HIV, hepatitis B and C, and TB among prisoners from 2008 to 2017. You see here the prevalence is the TB prevalence among prisoners is considerably high in several countries. The hepatitis B prevalence in light lila, and the hepatitis C is very widespread in some countries, and also HIV is not, let's say, abandoned, but is still prevalent in some countries. Infectious disease among prisoners with injecting drug use history. When we look particularly at this group, at injectors and infectious diseases, we see here some countries, for instance, Sweden, but also many others, shows that the hepatitis C prevalence in IDUs, in intravenous drug users among prisoners, is alarmingly high, over 90%, below ahead from 80% in Luxembourg and Spain, 75%. UK, Scotland, Germany is not shown in this statistic, but you see here for many, many prisoners, hepatitis C prevalence remains the major problem of infectious diseases, but also hepatitis B in Sweden and in Luxembourg prisons and in Czech Republic is a main issue. And HIV still remains quite high, over 30% in Spain, and Portugal 15-16%, and some other countries. And we see in the statistic on the bottom right side, HIV and hepatitis C prevalence among people who inject drugs use ever imprisoned versus never imprisoned, tested in the community. And you see here the share of people who have a history of imprisonment. The share is much, much higher than the share of people who never have been in prison. This is an overview of tuberculosis, and it is giving you an insight of TB incidence in a global picture. This is the yellow one, and the light blue one is the share in prisons. And you see here it is TB is overrepresented in many, many countries throughout the world. Although it's decreasing, it's still, when you look at 2014, the last stat here, it is still very high in several countries.